las presentaciones del día de hoy. Por favor, Ricardo, adelante.
Muchas gracias, Sergio, por la presentación. Efectivamente, me ha correspondido ser el moderador de las próximas dos conferencias. En cuanto a las preguntas que ustedes puedan tener, les pido, por favor, si las pueden escribir en inglés, si es posible, si no, yo las voy a traducir. Pero es para darle un poco más de fluidez a esta parte de secciones de preguntas y respuestas. Solo si es posible, les pido que las escriban en inglés. Okay? So, welcome to the third Aeronautical Engineering and Space Seminar organized by the Chilean National Association of Engineering. This time I will be the moderator for the next two conferences. And first, I am very excited to welcome Dr. Robert Zubrin this evening. He is a respected author of several books, including The Case for Mars and The Case for Space. In addition to being a recognized expert on Mars, Professor Zubrin is president of the Mars Society, an organization whose mission is to promote the human exploration and ultimately settlement to Mars by both public and private means. On the other hand, he is also president of Pioneer Astronautics, an aerospace research and development company in Colorado. Former staff engineer at Lockheed Martin, he obtained his master's in aeronautics and astronautics and a PhD in nuclear engineering from the University of Washington. Professor Zubrin's works covers various aspects of human space exploration, from how to get to Mars, how to establish a colony, obtain water, grow plants, what physiological aspect should be considered in a mission to the planet, and so on. His work has inspired generations of young people for more than 2 decades. People who are now professionals working in various areas related to space exploration. It is worth mentioning that this is the second opportunity that this Chilean National Engineering Association has the honor of having the presence of Professor Zubrin to give a talk, having been the first one in 2010. I leave you Professor Robert Zubrin and his talk, The Case for Space, How the Revolution in Spaceflight is Opening a Future of Limitless Possibilities. Dr. Zubrin, welcome, and this virtual floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. And thanks to all of you who are listening for giving me some time of your attention. I'm going to talk about the case for space, how the revolution in spaceflight opens a future of unlimited possibility. That's a lot to talk about in less than an hour. The case, the revolution, the unlimited possibilities. And so I won't be able to cover it all or even any part of it completely. But if you do find that you are interested in what I've got to say about these matters, I have written a book on the subject called The Case for Space. Unfortunately, it's not yet available in Spanish, but it is available in English on Amazon and either paper or Kindle. And if you're interested, you can get it. Now, okay, so let's start with the revolution. There's a revolution in spaceflight going on. It's an entrepreneurial revolution. It's being spearheaded by Elon Musk and the SpaceX company, but it is by no means limited to them. Okay, but you know, the cost of space launch was astronomical at the time of Sputnik, and it declined sharply to about $10,000 a kilogram by the time of the Apollo moon landing in 1969, 1970. But it stayed there at $10,000 a kilogram for the next 40 years. Through 2010, it was like a law of physics that this is what the cost of launch was going to be. But since 2010, it has dropped by a factor of 5. And this is due to SpaceX. introducing first new ways of doing business, and then the reusable or partially reusable Falcon 9, and the still partially but more reusable Falcon Heavy, with also a larger capacity, that are flying now. And as we speak, the SpaceX team is working on bringing into operation a fully reusable heavy lift launch vehicle called the Starship, which will have a capability of launching about 100 tons to orbit, which is close to what a Saturn V moon rocket could do, but at 1 or 2% the cost, because instead of being expendable, it is reusable. So we're talking about dropping the cost of space launch again by perhaps another factor of 5, bring it down to $400 a kilogram. Now, this is enormous. But in addition to bringing these particular flight systems into operation, what Musk has done is proven a point. And what that point is that it is possible for a well-led entrepreneurial team to do things that was previously thought that only the governments of major powers could do. And not only that, do it in 1/3 the time at 1/10 the cost or less, and even do things that they had deemed impossible altogether, such as having reusable launch vehicles that land back at the launch site instead of crashing into the ocean. And what this has therefore done, it has initiated an entrepreneurial space race of international dimensions. Of course, people hear about the Blue Origin and the Richard Branson's company, the Virgin Galactic, which are also started by billionaires, but there also have been a company started by working engineers. For instance, there's the Rocket Lab company, which is a New Zealand company, and it was not started by a billionaire. It was started by an engineer with ordinary middle-class means who managed to get investor backing. And so now New Zealand has reached orbit, even though New Zealand doesn't even have a space program. And this shows that the space is now open to small and medium-sized countries. If New Zealand can do it, Chile can do it. And if the Chilean government won't do it, then perhaps Chilean entrepreneurs can do it. And this, of course, is true of every medium-sized country around the world. And in particular, of course, the people who are very hot on Musk's trail are the Chinese. I'm aware of at least 5 private companies in China that have actual investor backing and that are working hard on creating launch systems comparable to the Falcon 9. Okay? They're copying us. Well, I'm glad they are, because they're putting a fire behind Musk. He knows he can't stay with just the Falcons, even though they are the most cost-effective launch vehicles in the world today. 3 years from now, there'll be Chinese launchers that can do exactly the same thing and made with cheaper labor. Okay, so he's got to have something better, and he's going to have something better. He's going to have Starship. So, what we're seeing now in aerospace is something that, for instance, very common in Silicon Valley, but never seen in aerospace, which is a company working to make its current technology obsolete, because it knows that other people are going to have that pretty soon and they need to have something better. So this dynamic is going to cause the cost of space launch to crash, because once Musk introduces the Starship in 5 years after that, there'll be Chinese knockoffs of that. And so he'll have to have something better still. And as the cost of space launch crashes, it's going to have a number of effects. First of all, there's going to be more space launches. That follows from supply and demand. You make something cheaper, more people can buy it and will buy it. But that means, well, first of all, that will help make the launches even cheaper just because of numbers, but it will also make spacecraft cheaper because they will be produced in larger lots, and the components of spacecraft will be produced in larger lots. So all the different pieces that go into a spacecraft, the control thrusters, the solar panels, the star trackers, the communication equipment, all this stuff, it's all going to become cheaper, okay? Furthermore, it's going to become better, okay? Why? because the cheaper space launch becomes, the less conservative spacecraft engineers need to be in their selection of technologies. For the past, 60 years, the wisdom among spacecraft designers has been, don't use anything that hasn't been used before. And the reason why they thought that way was if your launch is going to cost $300 million, you're not going to risk losing the spacecraft by trying out a new kind of battery or comm system or something that promises to be a bit cheaper or lighter or more powerful. But as the cost of space launch drops, your attitude for technical risk, your appetite for it becomes greater, and it will be done. So there'll be more spacecraft flying, and there'll be more risk-taking among spacecraft designers and trying out new technologies. Now, of course, some of those technologies will fail, but some will succeed, and therefore those technologies will become better. And therefore the spacecraft will become cheaper and more effective, i.e. more cost-effective. And with cheaper launch and more cost-effective spacecraft, what that means is all sorts of business plans that previously were visionary now can actually close as practical business plans. So, for example, you take this idea of space hotels that Robert Bigelow had in the 1990s. Now, in the 1990s, the numbers on that didn't add up. And so it never happened, even though he put some money into a company to create Space Hotel. There's no way to get there. And it cost a fortune to launch the thing. But now that's going to become more realistic. Orbital research labs. In fact, there are companies right now, including Lockheed Martin and Boeing and others, who are floating concepts for orbital research labs. Once again, NASA attempted to sell this idea back in the 80s. They said, well, we have the space shuttle and we're going to have the space station. So here's a way to get to space and there's a place to go in space. And you can do research on the space station, taking advantage of either zero gravity or hard vacuum, both of which are advantageous for certain processes. Well, it didn't work because the cost was much too high, the opportunities too infrequent, and the facility too inconvenient. I mean, who wants to have a research lab when you've got all sorts of strangers wandering around through your lab? You have no security for your intellectual property. But to have a private corporate orbital research lab, that's a different matter altogether. And, if it only cost, $60 million to launch it instead of $1 billion, and the spacecraft is maybe a $40 million spacecraft instead of $1 billion spacecraft. Now you got a $100 million project. That, of course, it is not nothing, but it is the kind of money people spend building large shopping malls or football stadiums. It certainly is something well within the budget of a Fortune 500 company. So we're going to see orbiting research labs. Corporate research. There'll be a Pfizer orbiting research lab and a Hitachi orbiting research lab, so forth. So this is going to happen. And then eventually even orbital manufacturing facilities for products that can only be made in space. And I also think that we're going to see entirely new applications of space technology, notably intercontinental travel. For the past 3,000 years, people have made a lot of money on the world's ocean, some by actually attempting to extract wealth from the ocean, for example, by fishing. But a much bigger business has been using the ocean as a medium of low drag transport. The oceans are a medium of low drag transport, connecting every port city on Earth to every other port city on Earth. Well, space is a zero drag medium connecting every point on Earth to every other point on Earth. And traveling through space, you can get to from anywhere to anywhere on Earth in less than an hour. And I believe this is going to become a reality. Maybe not from every city to every city. Maybe it'll have to be coastal cities so that the spacecrafts can take off from rafts offshore and there won't be too much noise. But still, there's a lot of places like that. And, to go from Chile to Tokyo in less than an hour, to go from Los Angeles to Sydney in less than an hour. This is something that people want to do and be willing to pay to do. And it's going to become possible. And, last year, there were about 100 launches to orbit in the whole world the entire year. And as a result of the falling cost of space launch, it'll soon be 200 and 300. But there are hundreds of intercontinental flights every hour, not every year. And if intercontinental space travel can become a reality and even get a few percent of that market, we're talking about increasing the number of space flights by 2 orders of magnitude. Okay, and once again, as the number of flights become more frequent, and the number of rockets multiplies, the number that will have starships, not a fleet of 4 or 5 like the space shuttle, but a fleet of 500 like some airlines. Well, then the ships will become cheaper, and in fact, there'll be used ships available as various intercontinental space lines proceed. If you're reusing a spacecraft, eventually you've got used spacecraft that the prime users are willing to give up and sell to people with less money. And so lots of different kinds of people will be able to get their hands on these things. Okay, Musk, says that he can produce a Starship for about $10 million each. He'll probably sell them for 20. Well, that means that used Starships will become available for 10 or even $5 million each. And you talk about flying to Mars. Starship is designed to take 100 people. If somebody could pick one up for $10 million and divide that by 100 people, that's $100,000 each. Not chicken feed, but there's a lot of people on Earth who could muster $100,000 if they really had to by selling their house, for example. And that means it will become possible for individuals or groups to decide to emigrate to Mars, to literally buy their ship and go, okay, and keep it on Mars as starter housing, okay, which is a good idea, actually, rather than go to all the trouble of sending it back. That's another option too. So what we're talking about are systems that are going to not only make interplanetary exploration cheap, but make interplanetary settlement possible. We're talking about realizing the vision of humanity becoming a multi-planetary spacefaring species. That's what's in the cards here. That's what is implied by this entrepreneurial space revolution. Now, and in my book, I discuss a lot about what that could be like. But let's now shift gears and talk about why it is so important that this actually be done, because I believe that it is. And in the book, I give 4 major reasons. One is for the knowledge. Second is for the challenge. The third is for our survival. And the fourth is for the future. Okay, and let's talk about each of them. Now, the knowledge, well, that's something that NASA and the other space agencies do talk about a lot, about the discoveries they make with their planetary probes and their space telescopes and so forth. And they're right to do so. These discoveries are important, but as we gain greater capabilities in space, as we become capable of launching observatories into space the same size as observatories that we have on Earth, where we're talking about hundreds of times the light gathering capability of the Hubble Space Telescope. If the Hubble Space Telescope was on the ground on Earth, it's a bit smaller than the Mount Wilson telescope that was built more than a century ago in California, and which I guess is still operated by a university, but is by no means a frontline instrument. But we're talking about launching telescopes, for instance, comparable to the great observatories that are being built in Chile now, putting them in space, and what they could do is spectacular. We're talking about being able to discover new laws of physics. Most of our knowledge of physics has actually come from astronomy, the classical physics, laws of gravity. came from astronomy. Much of electromagnetism came from astronomy. Relativity came from astronomy. Nuclear fusion was discovered through astronomy. And it's not surprising that these new laws of physics should be discovered through astronomy, because the universe is the best lab there is. It's the biggest, and it disposes of by far the most powerful forces. Well, we can explore it. We can learn more. And I think there's a lot more to be learned. Okay. I think we've only read about the first 3 chapters of the book of physics. And of course, discovering new laws of physics means new powers over nature of enormous dimensions. Then biology. I think that there are major discoveries in biology that are waiting to be made in space, and in particular on Mars. See, we don't actually know that much about biology right now. We only know about one variant of biology, which is Earth biology. All life on Earth at the biochemical level is the same. It all uses the same alphabet, DNA and RNA. It's like, okay, I'm an American, I speak English, we use the Latin alphabet. So do people in Latin America. They use the Spanish, which is a variant of the Latin alphabet, and the French and the Germans and even the Poles all use the Latin alphabet with very minor modifications. But that is because these are all places where either the Roman Empire or the Roman Church was able to go and be influential. But if one goes a bit east from Poland, one encounters a different alphabet, which is the Russian alphabet, which is a variant of the Greek alphabet. Okay. Although, while it is different, it is not that different. It uses some different letters, some of the same letters, but it works on the same set of principles, and it's not that hard for a person from the West to learn. And even if you go to the Middle East, where you encounter the Hebrew alphabet and the Arabic alphabet, they look very different from our alphabet, but they still work on the same principles, because we all have a common origin in the Phoenician alphabet. But if you go further east, you run into the Chinese alphabet, and that is different. I mean, truly fundamentally different. It works on an entirely different set of principles. It is not using symbols to sound out words. It's ultimately based on pictures. It's visual. And it has different advantages and disadvantages as a method of conveying information compared to the Latin and other Phoenician-based alphabets. Okay, it is a different information system. It can serve the same function. You can write books in it, but it's different. And it's as different from the Latin alphabet as silicon computers are from computers based on gears and levers, or electromechanical relays, or vacuum tubes on the one hand, or alternatively as quantum computers are on the other. Okay, and so these are different information systems. And for biology, and what is biology? It is self-replicating machines. That's what cells are. That's what bacteria are. And we have recently learned how to read this genetic code, and now we're starting to learn how to write the genetic code and be able to program bacteria to synthesize things on demand. Well, this is going to be a very powerful technology in the 21st century. But what if we could discover different information systems that life could potentially use? We might discover that on Mars, okay, or elsewhere in the universe, to learn things fundamental about self-replicating machines, i.e. biology. This is enormous. So our expansion into space holds infinite potential in these sorts of areas. Then there is the challenge. I believe that societies are like individuals. We grow when we challenge ourselves, stagnate when we don't. A Humans to Mars program would be a tremendous positive challenge to every country that decides to engage in it, in particular to the youth. It would say to every young person, learn your science and you could be an explorer of new worlds. This is the great adventure of our time. And in the 60s, we had the Apollo program here in the United States, and that's why I became a scientist. And in fact, the United States doubled the number of science and engineering graduates it had in the 1960s. Well, in this day and age, the social effect of having a bold space program would be much greater, because the science and engineering are not just open to boys, they're open to boys and girls now. And so we're talking about a much larger effect. And we're talking about, maybe, probably only a very small minority of these people will end up doing space, but that's fine. The rest of them will end up in every other field of science, engineering, medicine, and make innumerable innovations that benefit society in every way. Then there's the issue of survival. A lot of people don't know where the Earth is. So I'll tell you, the Earth is in space. That's where you live. You live in space. We all live in space. And everything in space is moving around quite rapidly under the influence of the laws of gravity. For instance, the Earth is moving at a velocity of 30 kilometers per second around the sun. And everything else is moving at comparable velocities, and nobody is controlling this flight traffic. So all these different flight vehicles are constantly crashing into each other with incredible violence. And the energy of something going at 30 kilometers a second, the energy per unit mass is 100 times greater than that of high explosive, 100 times. Okay, so the small bodies get completely destroyed in a crash, and the larger bodies get really smacked. And of course, this has happened to the Earth numerous times in its past, and it's caused mass extinctions every time. Carl Sagan used to say that all species either become spacefaring or extinct, because it's probably going on in every other solar system as well. Okay, we got to get control of this flight traffic. And in fact, by the way, this isn't just ancient history. Yeah, everybody knows about the meteor that hit Mexico 65 million years ago. Well, one exploded over the Bering Sea in December 2018, that is 3 years ago, Merry Christmas, with a force of 150 kilotons, that is 10 times the Hiroshima bomb. Okay, didn't kill anyone because there were no airplanes flying in the vicinity, and it was exploded at 60,000 feet. But if it was a little bigger, it could have made it to the ground and to the sea, and it could have caused havoc. Of course, one did cause havoc in Siberia in 1905, and another one in 1948. We have to get control of this flight traffic, and this can only happen if we become spacefaring, okay? And just to be clear, I'm not on board with the people who say, well, we need to go into space so that there'll be survivors on Earth if an asteroid hits. No, I'm not with that program at all. We're not going into space to desert the Earth. We're going into space to protect the Earth. And this is what we need to do. Okay, and then finally, there is the future. Now, there's really two futures. There's the ultimate future and there's the proximate future. Okay, now the ultimate future, if we go into space, is humanity becomes spacefaring and we establish new branches of human civilization, not only on Mars, but on thousands of planets orbiting thousands of stars in this region of the galaxy. New civilizations, new nations, new languages, new literatures, new philosophies, new histories, new heroes, innumerable contributions to science and technology, okay, communicating with each other, interacting with each other. This is what human civilization could be. This is something grand and magnificent that we can create. And when you have it in your power to create something grand and magnificent, you should. But there's another issue as well, which is how we conceive of the ultimate future will determine how the near future turns out, okay? And, well, look, people talk about the threats to mankind, the threats to our civilization, existential threat of climate change, or perhaps resource depletion, or some people talk about overpopulation. There's all these grand threats. Well, I believe climate change is real. I do not believe resource exhaustion is real at all. I think our resources are rapidly increasing, actually, as our technology advances. And I don't think overpopulation is a problem, okay? But one can debate that, but one thing is very clear, is that none of these things were the cause of the great disasters of the 20th century. The great disasters of the 20th century certainly weren't caused by climate change. Okay, they weren't caused by resource depletion. We didn't run out of resources in the 20th century. They certainly weren't caused by overpopulation. You know, at the time of World War II, the world had 1/4 of the population it has now. What were they caused by? They were caused by something else altogether. And what was that? Bad ideas. And in particular, one bad idea that came in a variety of forms. And what that bad idea is that there isn't enough for everyone. That there fundamentally is only so much here and it's not enough for everyone. So we have to take it before they get it or before they come and kill it and take it from us. Okay. And, you know, if this is your worldview, then you're committed to war. You're committed to war. And, you know, 1914, Europe was far better off than it had ever been in history, by far. Okay. And yet, well, 1912, General Friedrich von Bernhardi, chief intellectual of the German General Staff, wrote a book, Germany in the Next War, says, look, you know, here's Eurasia. Either we Germans are going to get it or those Russians are going to get it. Sooner or later, we're going to have to fight them for it. Should it be sooner or later? Well, clearly sooner, because we can take them down now before they industrialize, and it'd be much harder later. Okay, same thing, Japan and China, 1930s. Who's going to get Asia, us or them? The Japanese figured, take them down now while they're weak, because, and it's always going to be to somebody's advantage if you're going to have to fight sooner or later to fight sooner. It will always be the case, okay? And I happen to know that right now, I mean, there are people with positions of responsibility in America's national security establishment who believe that war with China is inevitable. Why? Well, because there's 1.4 billion of them. And if they all start having cars and driving around like us, there won't be enough oil in the world. Okay, so we got to stop them. And you can bet your bottom dollar that there are strategists in Beijing who look at this issue from the opposite side of the chessboard, who think comparable thoughts. And if these are ideas are allowed to prevail, there's going to be war. There's going to be war. Now, these ideas are not true. It is not true that the nations of the world are in a struggle for existence over limited resources. Okay, China right now is developing rapidly because of inventions ranging from electricity to computers that were all made in the West. But the West itself was able to have its renaissance because of inventions like paper and printing that were made in China. Okay, so in actual fact, we have benefited each other enormously. Okay, because inventions made anywhere sooner or later become used everywhere. But this is not what people see. They think there's only so much here. Okay, and you know, it's just like if someone who's uneducated in mathematics, you cannot convince them that there's an infinite number of points in a line segment. Well, here's a line segment. There's only so much there. If you know math, you know that that's not true. There's actually an infinite number of points. And I think actually the Earth has infinite resources, if you wanted to know. But because the things here can be combined in an infinite number of ways. But people can't see that, okay? But anyone can see, however limited their knowledge of mathematics, that a line that goes off infinitely in both directions, there clearly is an infinite number of points there. And so what's my point? It's that we're not going to get oil from Mars, okay? No, we may get some inventions from Martian societies. I think we will. I think Martian cultures are going to be very inventive. They're going to have to be to take on the challenges of the new world. But we're not going to get oil from Mars, okay? But what we are going to get that's even better than inventions is truth, a fundamental truth, okay? That humanity is not a bunch of wild animals in a struggle for existence over fixed resources, but rather that we are a family. We're a family of nations, a very disorderly family, one must agree, but nevertheless a family which has a common project of using its collective creativity to open up new horizons, okay? And new possibilities, to vastly expand the possibilities open to all of us, and that there's no point killing each other fighting over provinces if by working together we can open planets. And that's the case for space. I'd be delighted to take questions if there's time.
So thanks for your excellent presentation, Robert. It's always an honor to hear your wise and inspiring words. Yeah, undoubtedly the future of humanity is on Mars and in the space, and that we are lucky to witness the technological revolution that is happening before our eyes, and that will make space exploration possible. So we have two questions in the chat. Yeah, the first one is from Rodrigo Suarez, aerospace engineer. And the question is, do you think Chile could have a role in traveling to Mars? Any tip on what development area we need to focus on?
Okay, well, certainly Chile can have a role in exploring Mars. It's a question of choice. Look, the United Arab Emirates just sent an orbiter to Mars, exploring Mars. And, you know, Chile is a bigger country with significantly superior technological capabilities to the United Arab Emirates. If they could do it, you could do it, okay, and should do it. You know, important nations do important things. And Chile should not just be sitting there saying, well, what can we do? You should just take part. Chilean scientists could certainly take part as co-investigators on the various probes going to Mars by other nations. That could be as well. I think there's certainly also room in Chile for entrepreneurial space development. I mean, look, what's needed is for Chilean engineers to look at the space market, to identify a need, and then go to investors, people with capital, and say, look, here's our idea. We can do this. Okay, this is a better technology for spacecraft control or something. Get investment and produce a product. Okay, there's no reason why you can't do that. I also think that one thing that good way to get started, the United States government devotes 1% of all its NASA and military funds to what it calls small business innovative research grants. These are only biddable by small businesses, in this case, small is defined as under 500 people, which is not that small, but still, to propose innovative technologies that could be used by either the military or the space program. And they typically have a relatively small initial grant, and then if they're pleased with the work, they provide a larger grant for a phase 2. And in this way, small companies can get started developing one or another piece of space or military technology. And it creates, as it were, a large network of small companies with capabilities in these areas. And then some of which can then, once you've had a chance to, get your idea in the lab and show that it basically works, that certainly helps you go to investors and say, look, I've got something here, fund me and let's produce this commercially. And so you could start creating aerospace companies in Chile in this way. And some of them could be doing entire systems, and others just say engines, and others, even just materials for engines. I mean, you can go down the line here into systems, components, subcomponents, etc., are all, depending upon what it is, these things are challenges that can be tackled by small business, and some of these small businesses can then grow into large businesses. And this has been something that we've done here that's been very successful, and it's something that I think Chile should consider.
Thank you very much. We have a second question from Jaime Robles. He said, a fair argument can be made saying that SpaceX would not exist today without the initial technical and financial support provided by NASA. In regard to that, could you please share your perspective about the role of governments for the development of national space programs?
Well, that is certainly true. Okay, both the experienced engineers that SpaceX that was able to hire, who were a direct product of the pre-existing space program, as well as the new graduates which came out of universities which had space programs because there was a national space program and therefore were producing large numbers or fair numbers of aerospace engineers. The actual technologies in particular, while SpaceX has developed its own rocket engines, they've done it based on a craft, as it were, a technological field that was developed with government support. And of course, the market for the launches that SpaceX was selling, most of them have been government launches, not all of them, some of them have been private. But certainly without the government launches, they would have not had sufficient income. Now the government benefited though, however, greatly, because SpaceX has cut the cost of space launch. And this has benefited our military, it has benefited our scientific programs, because they now have a cheaper way of getting their stuff into orbit.
Thank you. And another question from Jaime is, based on your own assessment, and after the space transportation problem is solved, what are the most critical enabling technologies that are required for Mars colonization?
Okay, now, the critical technologies for colonization are those that relate to turning materials into resources. There is no such thing on any planet, including the Earth, as a natural resource. There's only natural raw materials. It is human technology that turns materials into resources. You think of land as being a resource. Well, land wasn't a resource until people invented agriculture. Okay, oil wasn't a resource until we invented oil drilling and refining and machines that could run on the product. And uranium certainly wasn't a resource until we invented nuclear power. So, aluminum, 200 years ago, nobody knew what aluminum was. It hadn't even been discovered by science, and it wasn't available to consumers until the 20th century. But once we developed the technology to separate aluminum from aluminum oxide, it became a very attractive metal for innumerable applications, instead of just being dirt. Okay, well, you talk about Mars. Okay, there's all the substances that you need, all the elements you need to do anything exist on Mars. The question is developing the technologies that allow you to turn them into useful resources. Now, in my Mars Direct plan, I address that at an elementary level of taking the most obvious resource, which is the carbon dioxide atmosphere and the water ice, and turning that into methane and oxygen, rocket fuel and oxidizer, okay? Which is fundamental to the mission plan, and that's fundamental to Musk's mission plan as well. Okay, but we need to go beyond that. We need to learn how to make everything on Mars. We need to grow food and make bricks, ceramics, glasses, plastics, metals, wires, tubes, habitation structures. We need to learn how to make all these things. And we need to learn how to make the energy needed to make these things. Because the difference between junk and useful material is basically order that is, the material becomes organized in a particular way, which requires energy. It requires energy to take iron out of iron oxide and turn it into steel. You know, it takes energy to do all these chemical syntheses required to produce plastics or glass, you name it. Okay. Now, initially, you know, for Mars, we'll probably just export nuclear reactors to Mars. And that's a good way to send energy from Earth to Mars. But it'd be better if we could actually make energy on Mars. And for that, I believe fusion power is the ticket, because deuterium, which is the fuel for fusion power, is quite common on Mars. It's 5 times as common on Mars as it is on Earth. And I think this is going to be one reason why Martian colonists, well, they're certainly not going to want to use fossil fuels, which you have to make with energy from something else. Solar energy is pretty weak on Mars. The air is too thin to get much out of the wind. There's no waterfalls. Okay, fusion power is the way to go. And I think this will be a driver for that. But basically, all these technologies required to turn Martian materials into resources, what NASA calls in situ resource utilization, and which I prefer to call local resource creation. Okay, this is what is needed for colonization.
Thank you. And I got a question as well. Yeah, in your book, The Case for Space, you mentioned the possibility of obtaining helium-3 from the moon to get fuel for fusion engines. My question is it possible to obtain this type of molecule from asteroid mining?
No, helium-3 is not to be found, to my knowledge, on the asteroids. Helium-3 can be found on the moon, and it can be found in the atmospheres of the giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. I think those are the main places to find helium-3 within our solar system.
Okay, thank you. So we don't have any more questions. Thank you, Robert, for your presentation. I invite